Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're going to be doing another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. This particular video will be for the Historic Best of 3 format. If you're looking for Best of 1 Historic, Standard, Explorer, we'll get to Alchemy with the new Lord of the Rings stuff once we get the data for it. Just check out the playlist, we'll cover them all there. As always, we get the data from Untapped.gg, what you see on the screen, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, tracks your own win rates, aggregates with other users, gives us a whole bunch of cool stats. Link is in the video description if you want to get started with Untapped. I will also paste all these deck lists, timestamp it so you can skip ahead if you want, find the deck that interests you, and kind of go from there. So it is the release of Lord of the Rings, which will impact the Historic format. We saw some of the decks be featured in the Best of 1 video. Right now for Best of 3, we don't have an aggregate enough data to look at the full kind of consumption. So I'm going to be featuring a bunch of decks leading up to Lord of the Rings that did have high win rates. And then I will also cover a couple decks that are doing well with some of the new cards in the format as well. So we'll feature a couple of those at the end. Largely, the impact to Historic thus far has been Reprieve for the counters as kind of like the blue-white control counterspell. We have a couple different combos with like the Samwise Gamgee one being the most notable. That goes infinite. There's the Rosy Oak combo, but that's usually a little bit better in Best of 1. It's susceptible to board wipes and heavy removal post-board. There's the One Ring that's seeing play in various kind of mid-range shells. And then there's Orcish Bowmaster that's probably going to be seeing some play in some of the Rakdos decks, kind of mixed into there as well. Outside of that, there's not likely going to be a huge amount of the new set. You might see as the Delighted Halfling, given that it's a dork that can color fix as well. Could see some play there. So we're going to get started. We're looking May 9th through June 20th. So about a month worth of data, good data set, looking at Diamond and Mythic, 30,000 games of Best of 3 played. So keep in mind, this is without Lord of the Rings for the first bit, and then we'll cover some Lord of the Ring decks. We'll hopefully for next week have all the aggregated data, but I want to get something out right now rather than nothing. I'd rather get some ideas, and then we kind of touch base, obviously, with the new set. The top performing deck, 74.5% win rate, is 4-color, 5-color, 4-ish.5 color domain Traxa Reanimator. So there's a couple different versions of this deck going around, but the core of the deck with this is using a domain package with the triomes to allow you to have a reduced leyline binding. You also get a Territorial Kavu, which can become a 5/5 for 2 mana. Good copy for Fable the Mirror Breaker. Crucius helps you kind of find and tutor for your bigger threats. Ideally, what you do is you bin Atraxa, reanimate it with Unburial Rites, which is a nice little combo that you can do there. Assemble the Team also helps you find key kind of combo pieces of that. But there's various Crucius piles in the format. This one is looking to kind of win through an Atraxa. There's also like the Mardu Reanimator decks that perform a similar kind of approach, but will use Priest of Forgotten Gods as a way to reanimate in addition to Unburial Rites. This one's kind of got a mid-range plan, a little bit more interaction, and then can just win with Atraxa as well. The sideboard with this deck, you got Thoughtseize for hand hate, Shieldred's Edict to deal with planeswalkers or just like big creatures opponent's side, Graveyard Hate, Sweepers, good against any sort of like the artifact deck, stuff of that nature, things that want to go wide. The Humans deck plays a lot of 1-drops, so it works well there. It is Zuku for kind of combo pieces. And then Niv-Mizzet Reborn is a nice card here. In the more fair matchups where Atraxa is not going to be at its best, or just like heavy removal decks, you can forego the Atraxa, play a couple Nivs, and this gives you a lot of card advantage as well. From there, we go to Mono Green Devotion. So a couple different versions of this deck are floating around. There's the Huntmaster version that has you with a creature toolbox. This is another version that's going around, but we're basically using like Leyline of Abundance with a bunch of dorks. This version is also playing Invasion of Ixalan to help you have another way to kind of dig for your Nykthos, which is kind of the engine of the deck. You're generating a whole bunch of mana with Nykthos. You have a whole bunch of Devotion, Kiora taps and taps. Karn lets you tutor up a Karn board, which we'll look at in a second. Cavalier Thorns helps you find your Nykthos. Same with Storm, and then this version is also playing a Hollow Henge Wrangler. So it's got like a spell book that you can draft just a bunch of like big beasts from it, but enters a battlefield, you seek a land card, so you get to tutor a card from your deck kind of at random. This could also technically find Nykthos, but you can discard lands and then conjure a copy of it to your hand. So late game, instead of flooding, all your lands turn into value, and this ability can also be activated from your graveyard. So even if this is dead, you still have the ability, or even if it's milled by Cavalier of Thorns, to just keep getting 6/6s, but like turning any of your lands into 6/6s. In terms of the Karn Wishboard, this is fully wishboardable. So you got like Graveyard Hate, you got Artifact Enchantment, Blow Up, activated abilities, Lifelink Trample, kind of the combo with Restorative Burst to gain a bunch of life with this particular deck. So you could keep buying back stuff, gain a lot of life that way there. This particular version of the deck cannot produce black mana. So you can't technically go infinite and mill your opponent out, unfortunately. Aetherflux Reservoir gains you... So basically you can kind of do it where you gain a bunch of life with this and then tutor up the Aetherflux Reservoir, shoot your opponent. Conduit of the Worlds lets you play stuff from your graveyard. Eska's Chariot for kind of a fair beatdown. Sky Sovereign, just blow up things. You can activate it with Karn to kind of get around the crew and blow up stuff. Tax Effect, blow up anything. Blow up your opponent's board, 3 big things to sack. Henge for kind of life gain, kind of value. And then Darksteel Citadel is a tutorable land out of the sideboard. We then go to Jund Midrange. So there's kind of like the Jund versions and then the Rakdos versions. I personally like the Rakdos version better, and it's cleaner mana. It's like Tarmogoyf is whatever. It gets hit by incidental graveyard hate, and then they're already going to be bringing in graveyard hate because of your Jarsoul. But Jarsoul is a very powerful card here. Lets you rebuy any of the spells each turn. Kind of goes up with intensity, so you cast the 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, kind of get value there. But it is another Crucius deck. Shieldred is kind of your top end here, but Fables, kind of copy, bunch of removals, Graveyard Hate kind of mixed into there. Your sideboard, you got like a bunch of just like incidental removals. So your Bloodchief's Thirst, Fiery Impulse, Edicts, Brotherhood's End. You have a couple tutorable effects in Knights of Souls Betrayal to get really good against like the Goblins deck. Sometimes the Humans deck if they don't have a Lord out. Shatterstorm blows up all the artifacts. Minsc and Boo, powerful threat against like Control. I think honestly if you're playing the Jund deck, play Minsc and Boo main. It's a very, very powerful card. But then you just have like incidental graveyard hate. The one thing I don't love with these Jund decks is they tend to have like a somewhat random selection of sideboard cards. Like just a bunch of 1-ofs. Like you can easily start tutorable by like taking out Shieldred and then discarding with Crucius, but the other stuff's just like incidental to me, I find at times. We then go to Gruul Goblins. So this is kind of a combo deck where you can play out pretty much your entirety of your deck. So with the addition of Cabaretti Rebels, this is a 69% win rate deck. You're able to, whenever you cast a creature spell, you seek a card from your library with less mana value, put it into play. So this kind of pulls creatures out of your deck. So with like the addition of Skirk Prospector, you have Goblin, Anarchomancer, and Goblin Influx Array to kind of reduce the cost of your creatures, and then lets you tutor stuff. You have Wily Goblin that basically replaces itself with the treasure. Same with the Instigators. You could cast them. It gets you 2 bodies that could generate 2 mana. The Trap Finder could seek something and reduce its cost. And then you have like Ruvenalt that gets you card advantage. The Matron can tutor you up stuff. Krenko makes a wide board. And then your Palishmon, whenever creature control dies, you get to ping something. So you have like a bunch of ways to like get haste or like ping or just make a really big board with like the Horde Masters and kill your opponent that way there. Your sideboard is just like another Muxus for like the heavy removal. You can just tutor. Trash Master for artifact decks, heavy removal. I like playing a lot of Influx Arrays. I think this card's very good, especially into like the heavy removal decks, since it tutors you up a creature every turn. You have Gem Palm Incinerator as removal, Bone Crusher just has some removal, gets around Sarah Paragon locks, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Graveyard Hate kind of mixed in. From there, we go to Orzhov Humans, just a shade under 70. So this is a Lurrus Humans shell, so you got a lot of powerful 1-drops here, protection for your creatures, tax effects, gets bigger, blows up artifact enchantments, card advantage, some removal. Coppercoat Vanguard gives your team a bonus in power, as well as gives them ward, which taxes your opponent's removal spells. A card that's usually a pain is Janira. So the exile a card from a graveyard is incidental, but the sacrificing of it to give your humans hexproof and indestructible can really mess up like a combat stage or protect against a board wipe, something of that nature. You have Juggernaut Peddler, which taxes the opponent's hands. So it's kind of like a Thoughtseize, but instead of just straight up discarding, you give them a Juggernaut, which more often than not is going to be a much worse card than what they're originally going to have. The Guardian Evangel lets you tap down a bunch of creatures or lands from your opponent. The card, you'll always have one that's left in your hand because you run out of mana to cast it. It gets discarded, but it's a good thing to have in your library or your graveyard because you can reanimate with Lurrus and then kind of get that chain going again. And then Thalia's Lieutenant puts a counter on all your creatures. In the sideboard, you have Graveyard Hate, Protection, and kind of pseudo-unblockable, more removal, Graveyard Hate, Artifact Enchantment Hate, kind of Reanimator, Cheat into Play Hate, removal, and then tax in Thalia. We then go to the Kethis combo deck. So it's a very powerful deck, but a very hard to operate deck. Essentially what you're trying to do is self-mill yourself. And then with Kethis, you're able to exile legendary cards from your graveyard, and then you can cast legendaries from your graveyard till the end of the turn. So you can basically keep replaying Jace, mill yourself, until you can generate enough mana to just cast Jace multiple times and mill out your opponent. You kind of self-mill yourself with Emery. You can also do it with Rona, but there's a combination of with the Relic of Legends and Rona. And then if you have a Mox Amber in play and a Mox Amber in your graveyard, you can loop them. And then this generates mana. So then whenever you cast a legendary, it untaps. You double up the mana with Kinnian. So you kind of get that value, the Chromatic Spear. So there's a lot of ways to kind of do that. Notably, the legendary lands can also be exiled to Kethis to activate the ability as well. It's a deck that takes a lot of practice, but it's very powerful and hard to deal with. In terms of the sideboard, you have Fatal Pushes as removal, Graveyard Hate, Lavinia kind of hurts the Mirror because they can't cast 0 mana spells. Stonebrain for combo, Lauren for artifact enchantment hate. It's a lot of counterspell based decks. You have Arasta, Scarab God for kind of the grindy or fair matchups, and then Ursa's Ruinous Blast as a removal spell that doesn't hit any of your creatures because they are all legendaries. One deck I want to show is the Rakdos deck that I've been playing. So I went 20-8 with it on the ladder, and then in events I went 12-13, so 32-11 with the deck overall. And then 2 of those losses, of course, were in the qualifier, day 2 of the qualifier, which is a pain, or the actual qualifier. I won the play-in, but didn't do well there. But it is a Rakdos Midrange deck. So this is a deck that I'm going to be introducing. I'm going to be trying out 3 to 4 Bowmasters in place of the Bloodtithe Harvester and the Cling to Dust. But just a variety of removal spells, the 6 discard spells. Shieldred's Assimilator is really nice in the Mirror and just eating at graveyards. I really like Seasoned Pyromancer as a card draw spell. The one other card I'm going to be trying out in this particular build, I will probably end up doing 3 Pyros and then play a copy of the One Ring. I may incidentally also just get rid of the Croxa and play the One Ring instead. One Ring and Shieldred's very powerful. Gets you a whole bunch of value in that space. In terms of the sideboard, you can see I've been playing like a bunch of different versions, testing out a bunch of different stuff. Just a bunch of removal, Go for the Throats, Edicts, Graveyard Hate, Hand Hate Graveyard, Sweepers, Hidasuku, Kolaghan's Command for like the fair matchups. The mono green matchup's pretty tough, the Devotion deck, but Extinction Event deals with a lot of their creatures really nicely. Invoke Despair for the Mirror, kind of grindier matchups. and then Chandra for counterspell heavy decks. So then covering a couple decks playing some new cards. So this was by Stalpano. They got number 67 Mythic with blue-white control. And this is featuring full 4 of the One Ring. So it's using the One Ring. Plays really nicely with Dream Trawler, actually, because you draw a bunch of cards and then gain back all that life with Dream Trawler. Reprieve is being played in here as a kind of remand-like effect. That plays really nicely with, with Snapcaster Mage. Same with Change the Equation. So counters, some exile removal. The Soul Partition can also reset your One Ring. So if you get too much damage being dealt to you, you can reset it and recast it again. It can also just be reset, cast to give yourself protection again, which is really nice. Divine Purges, a bunch of kind of cheap card draw removal. So kind of more of a tempo-oriented version. We're even just seeing 2 Teferis in lieu of the One Ring. We have Marches as just cheap removal. Stern Scolding as a cheap counterspell for creature decks, like basically counters everything out of a Lurrus deck. We've got Veto in here, Dispute as counters, more timely reinforcements. So interesting to see this over the 2 mana kind of variant of the card for the more aggressive decks. We have Divine Purge as another sweeper, and then Graveyard Hate with Unlicensed Hearse and Rest in Peace. Also interesting as well, opting to not go with any copies of Supreme Verdict, instead playing just the Divine Purge. I'd probably do like a split as well, because right now the only main board answers are really these 6 copies of Exile for like a Shieldred, for example, and your kind of plan is to draw cards. This version's also playing a Reliquary Tower, which is interesting, just as another way. The other thing I'd be interested to see, like it's obviously performing, but this list only has 24 lands, which is fairly low for a control deck. We've seen upwards of 30 lands being played with some of these decks. And then lastly, this is a list from Ash Lizzle. It's the Samwise combo deck. She's peaked at about 13 Mythic. She's been playing a lot on her channel on Twitch, so check that out. But it's using the combination of, so with Samwise Ganji, whenever another token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you create a food token. So Cauldron Familiar plus any free sack outlet lets you just keep sacking the Cauldron Familiar and then getting it back because it generates a food when it enters. So you can infinitely drain your opponent. Doing this with a Woe Strider shell. The rest of the decks kind of got fair value with like Priest of Forgotten Gods, Zulaport Cutthroat, Blood Artist for just drains. Tyvar helps you dig for your combo pieces as well as Collected Company. And then you can also get Pseudo Haste for your like Mana Dorks or your Priest of the Forgotten Gods. Sideboard's got Graveyard Hate, just removal, Hand Hate, Bone Shards is kind of catch-all removal, Planeswalkers or creatures, and then Meat Hook for the go-wide strategies. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, if you've done anything. The one deck I will say, there's likely going to be a Wizards deck. There was one in Best of 1 that we featured. I'm kind of curious to see where it leads in Best of 3, so I'm waiting for the stats for that one, because there's a lot of different ways you can approach that. So I don't really want to provide, I haven't been able to find a new variant of Wizards for Best of 3 right now to kind of reference in that respect. But in any case, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one and stay safe out there.